Most people believe that dementia begins with a dramatic movie-style breakdown. They imagine the sudden loss of identity, the inability to recognize familiar faces, or wandering off into the night. Because of this, when the brain actually begins to change, long before a diagnosis is ever written on a medical chart, most are sitting in their own living rooms, staring at these early warning signs and thinking, "I'm just getting older." But here is the truth that needs to be said. The brain does not suddenly flip a switch into dementia. It undergoes a series of quiet biological shifts that manifest in ways that are easily, tragically dismissed as mere senior moments. If you have ever walked into a room and forgot why you were there or found yourself struggling to find a common word in the middle of a sentence, you have likely felt that familiar prickle of fear. Most of the time, that fear is fleeting. You laugh it off, you blame your fatigue, and you move on. But what if those moments aren't just age? What if they are the brain's way of whispering that the internal machinery is beginning to struggle? In this video, we are going to look past the common myths. We are going to examine 3 specific, often ignored indicators that your brain is attempting to communicate a deeper change. These are not about memory lapses alone. They are subtle behavioral and cognitive shifts that many doctors see in the years preceding a formal diagnosis. We aren't here to induce panic. We are here to talk about clarity. By the end of this, you will know exactly which signs require a conversation with your physician and which are simply part of the rhythm of a long, full life. And more importantly, we will discuss the practical, actionable steps you can take today to protect your cognitive vitality for years to come. Stay with me, because the third sign we're going to discuss is the one most people mistake for simple stubbornness. When we talk about the aging brain, there is a tendency to treat every lapse in memory as the inevitable sentence. That is not just incorrect, it is medically dangerous. As a physician, I have spent years sitting across from patients who are terrified that a single forgotten name or a misplaced set of keys means the beginning of the end. I want to shift that perspective today. Your brain is the most complex, metabolically demanding organ you own. It isn't a static object that simply decays over time. It is a dynamic system. It thrives on novelty. It requires consistent blood flow, and it is incredibly sensitive to systemic health factors, your heart health, your sleep quality, even the levels of inflammation in your gut. When you feel off or notice a cognitive stumble, it is rarely a random event. It is a biological signal. The challenge is that our modern lifestyle often masks these signals. We live in a world of constant digital noise, sleep deprivation, and high-stress environments that can mimic cognitive decline, creating a fog that makes it nearly impossible to distinguish between simple exhaustion and actual neurological change. Quick favor before we go further: drop your city, state, or country in the comments. When I see where people are watching from, it helps me tailor the advice for the common health challenges I see in those specific regions. I read every one of these, and it gives me a better sense of who is in our community. Now, stay with me, because we are about to move into a story that highlights exactly how these symptoms first appear in the lives of real people. The reason most people miss the early signs of dementia is that the brain is a master at compensating. It finds workarounds. If one pathway becomes difficult to use, the brain routes the information through another. For a long time, this works perfectly. You don't even notice you're doing it. But there comes a point where the effort required to maintain those workarounds becomes too great. That is where we see the transition from getting older to something else. Let me introduce you to Arthur. Arthur was 68, a retired architect who prided himself on his precision. He was the kind of man who kept his workshop organized down to the millimeter and remembered the dimensions of every house he had designed over 40 years. His wife, Martha, first noticed the change on a Tuesday afternoon. Arthur was working on a small birdhouse, a project he could have finished in his sleep, but he had been out in the workshop for 3 hours. When she went to check on him, he was just standing there, looking at a pile of wood scraps, his hands hovering over the table saw. He didn't have the wood lined up. He hadn't started the cuts. When she asked him what he was working on, he looked at her with a fleeting expression of genuine confusion. Not because he didn't know who she was, but because he seemed surprised to find himself in his own shop. He told her, "I'm waiting for the measurement, Martha." But there was no measurement to wait for. He hadn't even begun the process. He went inside, sat in his armchair, and within 5 minutes he was reading the newspaper, acting as if the afternoon had gone exactly as planned. This wasn't just forgetting. It was a disruption in his executive function, the brain's ability to plan, organize, and execute a multi-step task. Arthur's brain, once a machine of precision, was starting to skip beats. Over the next month, Martha noticed more. Arthur would cook dinner, but instead of the usual methodical process, he'd leave the burner on, or he'd prepare one component of the meal and forget the rest, leaving the kitchen in a state of chaos he would have never tolerated before. He wasn't losing his memories of the past. He was losing his ability to manage the present. And yet, when she brought it up, he was quick to defend himself. "I'm just tired, Martha. It's been a long week." He believed it, and for a long time, so did she. But the patterns were there, woven into the quiet, everyday moments of a life that was slowly losing its rhythm. What happened to Arthur? It wasn't a sudden failure of his hard drive. It was a breakdown in his operating system. When we look at early cognitive changes, we aren't usually talking about a loss of long-term memory. The brain is incredibly good at holding on to the past. It's the present that becomes slippery. The first sign most people ignore is the erosion of executive function. Think of your executive function as your internal project manager. It's the part of the brain that allows you to multitask, plan ahead, prioritize, and regulate your impulses. In the early stages, this manager starts to get distracted. You might notice you start a conversation, get interrupted, and realize 10 minutes later you never finished your thought, not because you were busy, but because the thread of the task simply vanished. You might find yourself standing in the kitchen staring at the refrigerator, having completely lost the intent that brought you there. This isn't just getting older, it is a sign that the frontal lobe, the command center, is struggling to maintain focus. The second sign is temporal disorientation. This is a very specific, subtle feeling. It's not about losing track of what day of the week it is. Most of us do that occasionally. It's a feeling of being unmoored from the flow of time. You might feel like the morning passed in 10 minutes, or you struggle to remember if you did a task 5 minutes ago or 5 hours ago. The third and perhaps most overlooked sign is subtle emotional flattening. You might notice that things that used to excite you, a favorite hobby, a visit from a neighbor, a specific meal, just don't feel the same. The color has faded from your reactions. It's not depression. It's an early neurological signal that the brain's processing of emotional stimuli is becoming inefficient. You aren't becoming a different person. Your brain is just having a harder time lighting up the pathways that experience joy and engagement. When these three, executive slippage, time confusion, and emotional dampening, start showing up together, they are not just senior moments. They are the brain's quiet, flickering warning lights. I want you to pause for a second, literally. Put down whatever you are doing, take a deep breath, and really listen to what I'm about to say, because it contradicts almost everything you've been told about aging. We have spent decades accepting the narrative that cognitive decline is a one-way street, an inevitable slow descent that begins the moment we pass a certain birthday. We treat it like a car running out of gas. There's nothing you can do, you just watch the needle drop. That is a myth. The reality is that your brain is not just a passive victim of age. It is the most adaptable, plastic, and responsive organ in your entire body. Even in your 70 seconds, 80 seconds, and beyond, your brain is actively pruning old connections and building new ones. The symptoms I just described, the lost threads of conversation, the difficulty with planning, the emotional flattening, are often not evidence that your brain is broken. They are evidence that your brain is starving. Most seniors I treat who present with these symptoms are not suffering from an irreversible disease of the mind. They are suffering from a chronic, silent metabolic crisis in their brains. Their brain cells are functionally starved of the nutrients, oxygen, and metabolic fuel they need to keep the lights on at full brightness. When you start seeing these signs, you aren't watching your brain disappear. You are watching your brain signal for help. If you treat it like an inevitable decline, you do nothing. If you treat it like a metabolic signal, you start looking for the underlying blockage. It is the difference between watching the sun go down and realizing you just need to turn on the lamp. We are going to dig into exactly what those blockages are and why most people miss them until it's far too late. We need to talk about what is actually causing these warning lights to flicker. When I see a patient whose brain is struggling to maintain its executive function, I am not looking at their memory. I am looking at their vascular health and their systemic inflammation levels. The biggest, most dangerous contributor that seniors ignore is chronic systemic inflammation. We often think of inflammation as something that happens when you sprain an ankle or catch a cold, but chronic low-grade inflammation is different. It is a slow, invisible burn that affects every organ, and the brain is the most sensitive. When your gut health is poor, or you have underlying, undiagnosed inflammatory markers that inflammation crosses the blood-brain barrier, it literally irritates the neurons. It's like trying to think while standing in a room filled with smoke. You aren't forgetful. You are inflamed, and your brain is struggling to process information through the haze. Then there is the vascular link. Your brain consumes massive amounts of energy, and it relies on thousands of miles of tiny, delicate capillaries to deliver the blood that carries that fuel. If your blood pressure is consistently high, or if your blood sugar is fluctuating wildly, you are causing microscopic damage to those tiny vessels. You might not have a full-blown stroke, but you are experiencing what we call microvascular insufficiency. It's like having a garden hose that is kinked in a dozen places. The water pressure drops, the spray becomes uneven, and the plants, your brain cells, begin to wilt. Most seniors accept these off days as part of the aging process, but they aren't. They are the result of these hidden, underlying stressors. Are you managing your blood pressure with the same vigilance you use for your checkbook? Are you aware of how your diet impacts your systemic inflammation? These are not just medical buzzwords. They are the literal foundations of your cognitive future. When you ignore these, you aren't just ignoring health. You are leaving your brain to fend for itself in a hostile environment. And that is where the real decline starts to take root. To understand why this isn't just theory, we have to look at what the latest clinical research is showing us. A pivotal study published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease explored the relationship between midlife and late-life vascular health and the subsequent risk of cognitive decline. The researchers followed thousands of participants, tracking their blood pressure, metabolic markers, and lifestyle habits over a decade. The findings were definitive. There was a direct, statistically significant correlation between untreated subclinical vascular issues, things like slightly elevated blood pressure or inconsistent glucose control, and the early onset of what they termed cognitive fragmentation. These participants weren't presenting with full-scale disease yet. They were just like the patients I see every day. They were reporting those same slippery moments, losing their train of thought, feeling mentally sluggish in the afternoon, or finding that planning a simple day felt like a heavy chore. What the study revealed was that these weren't just random, age-related lapses. They were early markers of neurovascular unit dysfunction. Because the brain's blood vessels are so thin, they are the first to experience the wear and tear of systemic health issues, long before that damage is visible in an MRI or a cognitive screening test. Another massive review published in The Lancet further solidified this by showing that up to 40% of dementia cases might be either delayed or prevented by modifying specific lifestyle factors, such as blood pressure management, reducing systemic inflammation, and improving sleep quality. That number is staggering. It means that the inevitable decline we fear is actually something that responds, sometimes dramatically, to how we manage our internal environment. The brain is not a sealed vault that slowly leaks its contents. It is a living, breathing organ that responds to the health of the entire body. When the body thrives, the brain retains its focus. When the body struggles, the brain is the first to send out the distress signals we talked about earlier. So, what do you actually do? You don't need a fancy clinic or a cabinet full of expensive supplements to start protecting your cognitive longevity today. You need a protocol. A simple, repeatable way to check in on your brain's fuel delivery system. I call this the 3-check protocol, and it's something you can do every single week to stay ahead of these subtle shifts. Check 1, the vascular audit. Go beyond just knowing your blood pressure number. Ask your doctor for your pulse pressure. That is the difference between your top and bottom numbers. A wide pulse pressure can indicate stiffening arteries that are working too hard to supply your brain. If that number is trending upward, it's not just a heart issue, it's a brain protection priority. Check 2. The metabolic reset. We know that glucose spikes are like a wrecking ball to those tiny brain capillaries. For 1 week, try to eliminate the white foods, white bread, white rice, refined sugars, from your evening meal. If you notice your energy levels in the late afternoon stabilize, or your focus feels crisper throughout the next day, you've just found a massive lever for reducing your brain's inflammatory load. It isn't about perfection. It's about observing how your brain responds when you take the stress off your metabolism. Check 3. The executive challenge. This is the one that builds resilience. Your brain needs active input. Don't just watch television. Engage in activities that force you to plan, sequence, and organize. This could be gardening, where you have to map out the beds, learning a new recipe that requires multi-step timing, or even playing a card game that requires memory and strategy. When you do these things, you are literally exercising your executive function. You are strengthening the manager in your brain, keeping those neural pathways active, flexible, and ready to respond to the challenges of daily life. Do these 3 things, and you are not just waiting for age to happen. You are actively participating in your own neurological health. The most important thing to remember is that you are not a passenger in your own aging process. The moments of fog or senior moments that we've discussed are not necessarily a map of where you are going. They are a sign of what your body needs you to pay attention to right now. Whether it's managing your blood pressure, cleaning up your evening inflammation, or challenging your brain with new, complex tasks, every choice you make is a signal to your nervous system. You have more control than you've been led to believe. Do not wait for a formal diagnosis to start taking care of your cognitive health. Start the 3-check protocol this week. Talk to your doctor about your vascular profile. And most of all, stop dismissing your brain's attempts to communicate with you. Your brain has been with you through every memory, every challenge, and every triumph of your life. It's time to start listening to what it's saying. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit that subscribe button. We dive into these practical, science-backed strategies every week, and I don't want you to miss the next one. Also, rate this video from 1 to 10 in the comments below. Your feedback helps me refine these guides so I can provide the best possible support for this community. You are capable of maintaining your sharpness, but it requires being proactive. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I will see you in the next video.